Here's a guy who thinks atheism is a lie.
Atheists like to pretend they're smarter than the average person.
I suppose there are some atheists who think that because they've figured out that there's no God, they're smarter than everyone else who hasn't come to that conclusion, but I don't believe that about myself at all. I just can't make sense of the idea of God. That hardly makes me feel smarter than folks who are convinced that a God exists. They mostly seem to have no problem understanding what a God is.
They like to view people who believe in God as superstitious. They like to think that their education has caused them to surpass this archaic idea of belief in God.
Well, no, it's not my education that has caused me to not believe in God. It's my lack of understanding. I don't know how to believe in the existence of God because I don't understand what it means to say that God exists. That's not a product of my education.
The truth of the matter is, the scripture says, a fool has said there is no God.
Oh, the scripture says that? Oh, well, I stand corrected. Surely if the scripture says it, it must be true.
You know, a fool is not someone who's uneducated. It's someone who actually sees the evidence and refuses to go by it.
Well, then I'm not a fool because I don't refuse to go by the evidence for God. I genuinely fail to recognize any evidence for God.
And the evidence is quite clear. We know one thing. Everything came into being because it was created by something else.
You don't actually believe that. You don't believe that everything came into being because it was created by something else. Everything would include God if he existed, and you certainly don't believe that God was created by anything else. I don't think you've really thought through what you're saying very thoroughly.
I look at a tree, and I recognize that a tree came because there was an acorn.
What do you recognize when you look at God, other than a special pleading fallacy, I mean?
I look at you. I recognize you came into being because of a mom and dad. I look at a mountain. I see that it came into being by two land ridges pushing together, creating the mountain. In other words, everything we see today, it all came from something else.
If you really believed that, you'd believe that God came from something else. You don't.
In other words, you cannot say that something came out of nothing.
And I don't. I don't believe that there ever was nothing. There was never a time when nothing existed.
It doesn't exist. That's not possible. Common sense tells us that everything came because of something.
Then you're not following common sense because you don't believe that God came from something.
Now, you take us back to the very first act of creation. Scientists can tell you what happened at the very millisecond. They can tell you that this element created this element, and when this element hit, then this element was formed. They can tell you the process, but they can't explain to you what is the cause of the first element.
Yeah, they can. The cause of the first element was when electrons started orbiting protons for the first time. That's how hydrogen was created.
And if you say, well, we just need to go and we'll find out that it was this element that created the first element, well, then it ceases to be the first element.
This guy seems to think that elements can only be created by other elements. The first element was created by the subatomic particles of which it is composed and the forces that bring those subatomic particles together.
Then we have another problem. What created that element? And then we go infinitum until finally you realize there is no explanation because you cannot say that the first element came on its own.
No, it came from subatomic particles. Now you may ask what created those, and what created the particles that created those, etc. Ultimately, these things came from space-time and energy, and space-time and energy have never not existed. The only things that need to be created are things that at one time did not exist. There was never a time when space-time and energy did not exist. You can't create something that already exists, and there was never a time when space-time and energy didn't already exist. Not only do they not need a creator, they are incapable of having a creator.
So that's why belief in God is the most common sense thing for any human being to uphold.
So your argument is everything was created by something else, therefore there must be a God that wasn't created by anything else? Do you not see the contradiction there?
Because belief in God is to say that God, who is beyond the universe, is the cause of the first agent which created everything.
What does beyond the universe mean? Does God live in his own space-time continuum? Is he just a physical being who is an interdimensional alien? Or do you believe that God can exist independent of any and all space-time?
And when I look at the universe, it's made up of three things: time, space, and matter.
Also energy, which is actually more fundamental than matter.
So that means this God has to be beyond time, space, and matter.
That's a contradiction. The phrase beyond space is an oxymoron. Beyond is a spatial orientation. It would obviously be contradictory for anything to have a spatial orientation independent of space. It would also be a contradiction for anything to exist independent of time and space, because to say that something exists independent of time and space is to say that it exists but doesn't exist anywhere or at any time. That doesn't make any sense.
According to the Bible, God is eternal, which means he's beyond time.
To say that something exists beyond time is to say that it never exists.
He's everywhere, which means he's beyond space.
If he's everywhere, then he's taking up all of space. That's literally the opposite of being beyond space.
And he's invisible, which means he's beyond matter.
Air is invisible. Does that mean that air is beyond matter?
But since he is God, he can become matter. And in Christianity, we believe he did become matter through his son, Jesus Christ. So you realize, if you're an atheist, you're actually being foolish because you're trying to say that everything came out of nothing.
No, I'm not, because I don't believe there ever was nothing.
That's eventually your conclusion. Nothing is the cause of the universe.
I only believe nothing is the cause of the universe in the same sense that you believe that nothing is the cause of God. In other words, I don't believe that the universe had any cause, just as you don't believe that God had any cause.
That doesn't make sense. The only explanation is God created the universe.
What's the explanation for the existence of God? If God doesn't need a creator, why does the universe?
Atheism is not the knowledge that God doesn't exist, but the wish that he doesn't.
How can I wish for something to not exist if I don't understand what it means to say that it does exist?
Because atheists want to live in a world where they're not challenged to keep the moral laws of God.
Even if I believed in God, I wouldn't be challenged to keep his laws. I wouldn't give a shit about his laws.
I want to share with you the 3 proofs that atheism is a lie. I think the first proof is that God made us believe in him.
Then what's the point of evangelism? If everyone already believes in God, why does apologetics even exist as a practice?
Ecclesiastes says that God put it into our hearts to believe in eternity.
I believe in eternity in the sense that I don't think time will ever stop, but I don't see what that has to do with God.
We're the only creatures on the planet that believe that God exists and that we're going to live after death.
Not only do I not believe those things, I don't even know what they mean. And again, why are you trying to convince me of something that you think I already believe?
None of the animal creation believes that. In fact, we're here at a zoo, and it's fun to see the zoo. It's fun to see the animals. We love the animals. But in the end, we as human beings are the only ones that believe in God. And why?
How do you even know that? I've never even heard of a Bible passage that says that animals don't believe in God.
Because God made us believe. And as much as atheists try to shake off the belief of God, they still have to contemplate that God exists. So the first proof that atheism is a lie is God put it in our hearts to believe in God.
Why do you need to present a proof then? If that were true, what would be the point of telling such a lie? What would be the point of telling a lie that nobody believes? I know you think that it's based on a desire to sin or some such thing, but if I really believe in God, why would I have to lie in order to sin? Lots of people sin without denying that God exists, so clearly lying and saying that he doesn't is not a prerequisite. Also, what would I gain from lying about God? It's not like if I just say that God isn't real, that somehow gets me off the hook for my sins, so what would be the point?
Second thing, common sense. So we know that nothing can create something. We know everything comes from something else.
Then what did God come from?
So if we go back to the very beginning of the universe, what made it?
I believe that the universe is just as much in need of a maker as you believe that God is in need of a maker.
You can't have it just magically appear.
And it didn't. The universe is the space-time continuum. In order for something to appear, there must be a time when it didn't exist, followed by a time when it did. Since there was never a time when space-time didn't exist, it has, in that sense, always existed, and therefore didn't appear at all.
You have to have a divine being that is greater than the universe making it.
What does it mean for something to be greater than the universe?
And this is why we believe in God, because it's common sense. Only God, the unseen, uncreated God, can make that which is created.
What makes you think the universe was created? If God doesn't need a creator, why does the universe?
And then finally, the third reason that atheism is a lie is God made a universe that's moral. C.S. Lewis, who was an atheist, came to believe in God for one reason. He thought about the fact that the universe is a moral creation. That is, we know there's right and wrong, good and evil.
I don't, at least not in any objective sense, and even if a God existed, I still wouldn't see his standard of good and evil as objective, because there's no objective, non-circular reason why I ought to abide by God's morality. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.